Well, good morning, friends. It's so good to be here. I love coming to Amplify. This is my fourth year in a row, and thanks, Andy and the team here, for inviting me to be here. You know, I've been having a lot of ear pain recently, and maybe it's the charts that are coming out of my ear. That's right. Now I know. Now Ed helped to diagnose it. Hey, let's jump right into it. We want to talk about what's happening, and I've been doing research now for 30 years. I started straight out of college, and I've been at Barna now for 30 years. I worked for George Barna for about 15 years, and then I bought the business from him in 2009. And I feel like I have been practicing research for these last 30 years for this moment. And it is really fun. We're going to have some really good times, I think, together with the data. Sometimes people think we have the spiritual gift of discouragement, but I have some really great data to share with you today. And I'd like to jump right in and talk about how we could prepare for this next decade, what our churches might look like as we think about preparation for the harvest. The first thing I want to talk about is that we can prepare for spiritual renewal. I believe that these are the days that we have been praying for. As Ed talked about, sort of this disrupted and opportune time. This is sort of unpredicted. I'm going to show you I think the coolest slide that I've had the privilege of showing now for perhaps my whole career, but this is it. This is the slide. Belief in Jesus is rising, and you can see since COVID, there has been a steady increase year over year of the percentage of Americans who say they've made a personal commitment to Jesus Christ that is still important in their life. That represents 30 million more Americans today who say they're open to Jesus than during the depths of the pandemic. That is worth some applause and some praise, because that is 30 million more Americans. Now, I want to acknowledge that this is just a kind of a lightweight question. There are other ways we could measure faith and religion and discipleship. This at least tells us that people want to be associated with Jesus. In fact, we see sometimes people who say they're not a Christian, but say they're a follower of Jesus to this question. So following Jesus is bubbling out into new segments of our society. And this was a surprise to us as a researcher. In fact, we just released this data this year, even though we have been tracking and noticing this trend for the last couple of years, partly because I wanted to make sure that we were seeing a steady year-over-year increase. We didn't want to call it a trend until we had the multiple years of increase. Now, the other thing that is really surprising is this, which is that it's mostly men and young men who seem to be making commitments to Christ, and younger generations. So we're looking at boomers and Gen Xers and millennials and Gen Z from right to left. And you'll notice that, there's a lot of steadiness across the boomer generation, even a decline among women a bit in their commitment to Jesus over the last 6 or 7 years. Gen X, pretty flat. It's millennials that have a steep incline, and especially Gen Z, and it's especially men among Gen Z and millennials who are making this commitment to Jesus. Again, we live in a very Christianized, but not necessarily very Christ-following society. So what will we make of this openness? And people are open for a lot of different reasons. I've been having this conversation with our team a bit. We've got a study in the field. If people come to Jesus for political reasons, is that a good enough reason for Jesus to work in their life? If people come for family reasons or other kind of social reasons, is that a good enough reason for people to come to Jesus? And how will we take advantage of this moment to help people actually take their roots deeper and deeper into God's word, into the true nature of following Jesus today? But friends, this is 3 really surprising findings if you're tracking at home. So much so that I just want to call it out again, because as a social researcher, this was not on our bingo card at all. First, that we would see a return to Jesus. The idea that America is on a slow, inevitable decline is patently untrue. There is evidence that people can have a spiritual renewal. That is really cool. The second is that it's young people, not older adults, who are coming to Jesus. This was so much so that when we've talked about some of the challenges of discipling young people, pastors will often tell me, let's not worry about young people. They'll come back to church when they're married or have kids, which is a really lame excuse, honestly, to target certain demographic groups that don't make sense to us as a church. But this is telling us that young people are very open and hungry for gospel truth. And the third is that it's men, because typically we've seen that women tend to be the backbone of Christian faith and practice in our society. So Jesus is back. Younger people are leading that charge, and men are at the forefront. So those are three really surprising findings. Now, here's another bit of data. We haven't even published this yet. I just ran this data last week for a meeting I was looking at, what I was speaking at. And again, you'll notice that it's comparing just Protestants and Catholics, the same trend line. It's actually Catholics who have increased in their commitment to Jesus the most over these last 5 years compared to Protestants. So again, the faith in Jesus is bubbling out into all these really unique segments of our society, and it represents such incredible news. Friends, this is a really cool moment. These are the days we have been praying for. Now, we could continue on in this theme of good news by looking a little bit at church attendance, and we also have seen that church attendance has been bouncing back. I'm with Ed in that I wouldn't call this yet a revival, but I do think there are signs of spiritual renewal and openness. And here is an example of that. If we just look at those who are churchgoers, those who've been at least once in the last 6 months, and we segment out the different generations, we actually found this very interesting thing that it is Gen Zers and millennials who attend more weekends per month than older adults. Some of this is related to age. As people get older, they aren't feeling well, or they've got other priorities. But this is a really important time to see that Gen Zers and millennials are actually coming back to church among those who are churchgoers. So look, we can kind of look at this long-term trend. You can see the elders are 1.4 and boomers at 1.4 weekends per month. And it started back in 2000, over 2 times a month that they were attending. You can see the slow, kind of steady decline. The year 2000 has the biggest dip because of pandemic. But notice here again that the last 6 years, we've seen this steady increase among church-going Gen Zers and millennials as to the average number of weekends that they're attending. There's something happening, as Ed described. There's something happening, something stirring. Younger people are hungry for a deeper level of truth, a deeper kind of experience. So we can prepare ourselves by being more and more ready to welcome this generation of young learners, and recognizing even at their best, they're only there about half of the weekends. So how can we disciple in this moment? How can we take this moment of desperation, of learning, of hope, of trying to figure out how to put together a life of meaning? How can we make the most of that? So I would like to just pause and just say, what an absolutely incredible time to be on mission with Jesus. This is a conference called Amplify. We have been tracking for the last few years. I went back and looked at some of my previous talks for you, and it was interesting because we started looking at sort of this rise of spiritual openness, that younger generations were saying that they were more open to Jesus, more open to God after the pandemic. This is about 2 or 3 years ago. This has been such an interesting ride for me as a social researcher. At times, I've gone back to our research team and said, could we just double check that? Where are we getting these young people? How is this true? How is this possible? And so again, we'll sort of see where all this heads. None of us can predict where we're heading, but people are open to renewal. They're open to renewal. Now, they're open to just about anything and everything. They're open to crystals. They're open to meditation. They're open to all sorts of religious ideas. And so we have to find a way to have a gospel proclamation moment that also leads to deep discipleship with people. And people, I spend my whole career studying people. People are so interesting. Leadership would be amazing, wouldn't it, if it wasn't for the people? So people are curious. I find them very curious. I'm a social researcher. We've interviewed millions of people. So here's a little fun journey we could take through the human nature. All right. So this is one of my favorite little stories. This is a book called Subpar Parks by Amber Scher, America's Most Extraordinary National Parks and Their Least Impressed Visitors. Amber went through the interwebs and found people who really did not like their experience in a national park. So much so that they said things like this. They went to Bryce and they said, it's too orange and too spiky. They went to Yosemite and they said, trees block the view and there are too many gray rocks. I think gray rocks are kind of the point of Yosemite when God set that valley in motion. The only thing to do around here is to walk around the desert. That's Joshua Tree. Ed went to Joshua Tree. Ed went to Joshua Tree and was surprised to find there was more than one Joshua Tree. He could have. It was like the U2 cover. Yeah, he was convinced there was only one Joshua Tree. We actually did a little road tour earlier this year, so we have too much dirt on each other. So Ed, there are two Joshua trees. Yeah. All right. Here we can continue on. So this is our little exercise in human nature. Like, how can you go into these cathedrals of God's glory and come away with these kinds of things? So Glacier, it's too cold for me. They might have taken a clue from the name of the national park. Too many mountains, trees, snow, etc. And North Cascades. I love that it's like an etc. It's just like the whole thing was a rough experience for them. Yellowstone, someone said, save yourself some money and boil some water at home. I'm convinced this person must have had a small toddler in the minivan, and they were just complaining, and they get out, and they're like, really? It's just like some bubbling water, right? So anyway, who knows? Okay, we can continue on here with the Grand Canyon, a very, very large hole. Sequoia National Park, there are bugs, and they will bite you on your face. And finally, I didn't even get to touch lava, was the recommendation of Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. All right, so the reason I go through all this is because human nature is so fascinating to me, that there are human beings. How many of you would say that you're an outdoors person? How many of you would distinctively say you're not an outdoors person? All right, I like it. Fewer people, but people are interesting. Now, here is the thing. People leave their subpar church ratings with Barna. And we're going to go through a few of them just today for our little act of spiritual discipline. I just go for the music, the rest annoys me. These are actual qualitative comments. We've used AI to kind of generate some posters to make it look funny, but it is outdated and somewhat judgmental, or there is a scandal with the misuse of church money. We could talk about my members for my church are superficial and closed off. I kind of felt like I was a guinea pig. You aren't laughing as hard at these as you were at the national park posters. The pastor is cold and acts like a dictator. My church meets in my house and I don't want people over. That might have been a pastor or the pastor's wife. All right, so human nature is so interesting. And listen, I think that part of the reason I use that whole humorous thing is that I do think that humor is going to be a really important part in a disruptive age, in the contentious space that we have. We do need to laugh. We do need to laugh at ourselves. And we do need to laugh at human nature. I know how hard it has been as leaders. And Amplify is a place where we get to think again about what it is that God is calling us on mission in this sort of meme culture. You know, with my kids, I've got a 26, 24, and 21-year-old, and sometimes they're laughing at stuff. I'm like, what are we even laughing at? And it's actually something else that triggered them to laugh at what we were all talking about in real life, IRL. And so human nature is so interesting. And this whole experience, this notion of we're going to prepare for renewal. But friends, I don't want to interview people in a few years who went through this moment of spiritual openness and came back and had things to complain about. Now listen, people will complain and they'll find, the enemy of our souls finds reasons to cause us to doubt. Like, did your pastor really say that? Did they really mean this? I bet you're really disillusioned now, aren't you? And I think we have to actually prepare this generation for that kind of disillusionment and give them kind of people are going to suck at times. So you gotta, don't let that ruin your faith. Don't let that shipwreck your faith, as Paul writes. So, but people are open to renewal, but people also need community. This is another way we can prepare for the next decade as a church. We can prepare by forging even deeper community. Now, here is where the data takes a turn, and we're going to talk about the fact that despite the fact that there is an increase of attendance and spiritual interest among men, there's actually a decrease in some ways among women, especially young women. So let me just show you a little bit of this data. This is important for us to pay attention to, and there wouldn't be a Barna data without a little bit of let's pay attention to some of the bad news. But here is the green is a young adult women, the purple is young adult men, the blue is teenage women, Gen Z women, 13 to 17. And the yellow is Gen Z young men, teen men. And this is just we have not seen patterns like this where young women are actually more likely than young men to say they're religiously unaffiliated. Furthermore, we could look at just all women and men in this data here, looking at volunteerism, and there's actually a significant drop in the last 25 years in terms of church volunteerism, in terms of volunteerism in nonprofits. Women don't want to be the church's free labor. They don't want to just like take care of the kids because they're a woman. There are all sorts of questions that women are asking. Actually, if you go to barna.com, we have a whole article about the struggles of women and young women today in the church. And so we have to pay attention to the questions that women are asking. One of the things, we did a study for the Mom Co., and one of the things we learned is that they don't want just content from your church, they want community. The content preaching was like 6th on the list why young moms of young kids come to church. Top of rated was to experience God and to experience community with other women. And so there is this real hunger for community. If we're really being honest, and I want this to come across, so I'm a son of a pastor. I love my local church, this church in Fort Worth, Texas, Antioch. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But if we're really being honest about the structure of congregational life, there is a sense in which we're kind of in an event management business. And we're trying to shuttle people in and out of our events. And that is okay. That is a pure and holy expression of the church. But this generation is listening to long-form podcasts. They're listening, they're going to all sorts of other places. Women don't just come to your church just to hear the sermon. They're trying to be immersed in a community that is glorifying Jesus and learning to be, not conformed to this world, but to be transformed by the renewing of their mind. So to prepare for this generation, we have to help this generation understand that they need a deeper form of community. And here is the larger trend line. I'm going to take a couple moments to talk about this. This is a really interesting look at our collective experience of religion and of church attendance. Now, first of all, we're looking here at weekly church attendance, people who report attending church in the last 7 days. A couple things we could notice. First, the reason that this was the chart that Ed asked me to stay up late for to publish on our website. First, look at the spike here in the last year, and just a really interesting, we're kind of tracking that trend. This is part of the reason I was a little reluctant to publish it, because I don't want to make too much of a kind of a one-time data point, but notice that there is something happening where church attendance, or at least the perception of people wanting to say that they're a church attender, is happening. Again, I don't think that 45% of all men in America or 36% of all women in America have attended church in the last 7 days. There is a technical term that I learned from Ed Stetzer when people over-report their religious behavior. It's called lying. And it's actually called the halo effect. People tend to want to look religious. And by the way, that's actually part of the reason why I say this is a spiritually open moment. People are open to showing that they want to be Christian. They want to show themselves as churchgoers. That is a positive step in the right direction, even if they're not attending as often as they report. But what's the other big thing that you notice about this chart? The last 5 years. Men are so much more likely, or at least by comparison to the fact that over the majority of the last 25 years, women were the backbone of church attenders, but that has really flip-flopped. And so women and men need deeper forms of community. The church can't just be an event management business. They have to find Jesus, and they have to find each other. This is sort of these two things. So first, we prepare for renewal because Jesus is center. We want to help people discover Jesus. And number two, people need deeper community. Now, on this theme of community, I want to just talk about pastors. A brand new study that we had just launched called The Relationships of Today's Pastors. We found that pastors struggle in terms of the relationships and their ability to relate to people who do not share their experience in life. And so here is just an overview of comparative data on flourishing. And you can see different aspects of flourishing: relationships, well-being, finances, vocation, faith, a kind of a total aggregate score. And you'll notice that pastors actually rate themselves lower than practicing Christians when it comes to relationships. And so pastors are telling us something important about their own connectivity in a moment when we have to lock arms and be better connected relationally. Like, pastors, we don't want you to wear out. You've been through a lot. Now, here is another, I think this is such an interesting bit of data about the profile, the relational, and honestly, a really good set of data. Pastors, the majority of whom are men, 9 out of 10 senior pastors are men, but they're much more likely to be married than the general population, 91%. They're much more likely to have had kids, 90% of all pastors. They're much more likely to have more children, 2.7 kids per pastor. They're just as likely to experience divorce, 16% compared to the average among U.S. adults at 18%. And they're more likely to get remarried post-divorce. You can see 73% compared to 55%. So I just want to kind of note that this is an important profile. And again, there's nothing wrong with this. This is actually a kind of a beautiful picture of the relative relational strength of the mostly men and women who are the senior leaders of Protestant churches. But what does it tell you? It tells you, I think, that there is a certain kind of person that is a pastor. I am a widower. My wife passed away about 5 years ago from brain cancer. And so these last 5 years have been a real interesting experience for me as a leader in a lot of different rooms and a lot of different stages, as the single guy, as the person who's not married. And I've realized a lot about that. It doesn't make me like the ideal person to speak on every life circumstance, but it has helped me understand that for people who are single, which happens to be a majority of Americans, for women who aspire to be married, or men who aspire to be married, or for people who haven't had the kind of experience that most pastors have had, this tells us something about the connection or disconnection or the ability for leaders in churches to connect with someone else's life experience. And so this is just, I think, again, it's a profile of a really beautiful relational picture for pastors, but it also tells us that perhaps they aren't catching all of the cues from a population that is different. Now, another really big headline for me in this data was this. We asked pastors, do you seek, if you don't mind sharing, do you currently use the services of any of the following? And I'll read from right to left. Marriage counselor, 3%, life coach, 4%, professional counselor, 9%, professional mentor, 11%, therapist, 12%, spiritual advisor, 17%, personal mentor, 22%, none of the above, 52%. So friends, if we're going to lead people in a moment of mental health crisis and relational health crisis, and we are telling that we're already reporting that we're low when it comes to relational flourishing, we have a certain kind of maybe mindset of what it means to live a whole life, to be married and to have kids and to kind of follow the traditional path. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's not the normative experience for most families in America. And furthermore, if we're not going to use the resources of others around us, we're going to find that this is going to be a recipe to not connect with a generation that wants to see us relationally whole, that wants to hear from us about the kinds of resources that are helping us. So that's the thing. People are open to renewal. People need community. Women, pastors, men, all of us need community. And here's my third point, is that people have gifts to share. So to prepare for this next decade, I believe this is one of the really critical and cool ways. Sometimes we underestimate the intersection between faith and work and our calling. And I believe we can prepare for this next decade by helping people to use their gifts for Jesus. Ephesians 2:10 says, for we are God's handiwork, created to be a masterpiece. Not just professionals, not just young, not just old. We're a masterpiece in Christ Jesus to do good works which God prepared in advance for us to do. Now, the reason why I think this is so important is this is one of the critical ways, and we've been researching and writing this for a while, about vocational discipleship. I believe that a lot of young people are lost, especially in a moment like this where there's a lot of people saying, yeah, I'm interested in Jesus, but does it connect with what I'm called to do? Does it connect with what I'm made for? And I believe this verse and many others in the New Testament are just a great template for how we could think about developing the gifts that God has given us. Isn't it amazing that Paul has it feels like such a modern, or maybe we have an ancient way of understanding gifts and giftedness. I think Paul would be really into the different psychometric tests, like Enneagram and StrengthsFinder and Working Genius and Myers-Briggs, because he tends to, even in his writing, which is inspired by the Holy Spirit, to put people into different buckets, doesn't he? Some of you are apostles and prophets and evangelists and pastors and teachers, a kind of segmentation approach to talking about human gifts. He talks about the spiritual gifts. He talks about some of you will have these gifts or you'll not have these gifts. And I just think even the idea of a masterpiece, it's a beautiful theology of the priesthood of all believers. And I believe this moment of spiritual openness requires that we think even more deeply about helping to unlock people's potential and their giftedness. See, these crazy tools, I'll pull out my smartphone, they know more about us than we seem to know about ourselves, don't they? But big tech isn't interested in your flourishing. They're just interested in you as a consumer, as a part of the whole matrix. You might see what I did there. You realize that this is a moment for us to help this generation really understand what they're made to do. We've been hard at work with a couple of partners. You can actually check out this really cool report. I'm going to show you a couple pieces of data from it. We did it with a group called Faith-Driven Entrepreneur. Entrepreneur is an untapped problem solver for the church. And you can download this report for free. I'm going to show you a couple of the findings from this. This is cool. This is a really cool bit of data. We found that 7 out of 10 Americans believe in the power of a pastor and entrepreneur partnership. This is among all U.S. adults. Our sample was 1,500 U.S. adults collected earlier this year in February. And you'll notice that healthy partnerships between churches and entrepreneurs could help solve problems in the world. And you can see it's 7 out of 10 Americans who believe that is true. Do you know how hard it is to get 7 out of 10 Americans to agree on anything? But there's some aspiration here. You can see Christian entrepreneurs are likely to agree with that slightly more than the national average. Only about half of pastors, maybe not surprising, see the potential of entrepreneurial thinking, so 53%. We could continue on with some of these themes of like the opportunities that we have to connect their faith in Jesus with something deeper or something else in their life, like this idea of their talents. 62% of practicing Christians wish they had a clear understanding of how to use their talents to serve God. That's the little tan-colored chart there. But 84% of all Christians say they are aware of the gifts and talents that God has given them. So I believe that the church is a great place to help us develop people, to help call them and commission them for ministry in all of the vocations, to give them a sense of how God has wired them as a masterpiece. Perhaps even in a time of AI, where there seems to be great threats as to our value as humans, we could especially lean into this. So pastors feel called but not always confident to counsel on work issues. All right, so that's another great opportunity. I believe this idea of vocational discipleship, help connect people to their gifts. Here's another study. You're going to be hearing from Mike Sharrow here at this friend of mine, and you'll be hearing from him. This is a brand new study. This is a preview version, Faith Forward CEOs, so the research and insights on executives who lead differently. So our company has spent a lot of time in the last few years really focusing in on this faith and work and this sort of masterpiece, like how can the church actually help to develop and release people in their gifting. So people are open to renewal, a great open moment. People need community, and people have gifts to share. Friends, I believe this is a moment where we're all searching for a kind of belonging, even in our politically polarized context. And you think about all of these ways that, as Ed talked about, sort of this unmooring. People are looking for something to belong to. And I want to propose to you that as we think about those 3 areas of an open moment for renewal, of a need for community, and an opportunity for us to help people develop their gifts, that it is a moment of cultivating churches of belonging, of communities of belonging. We belong first and foremost to Jesus. We're given a new identity, a new name in Christ. We belong to each other. We're formed. We're loved into loving Jesus. And then our gifts belong to the world. This is an important moment as I think about my own kids and my nephews and nieces. There's my 2 girls. There's Emily on the left. There's Annika, my daughter. There's Annika and Zach, my son. Some of my kids there and some of my nephews and nieces. A couple of my nephews and nieces, the tall one in the back, Luke, and Lauren, she's between Annika and my other niece, Caitlin. They got baptized just a couple months ago. And friends, you can clap for that. Even just a few years ago, I would not have picked that. I wouldn't have expected that. I feel like we're seeing in so many places people being swept up in a spiritually open moment that Jesus is becoming real. These are the moments we're praying for. And so I show this to kind of give you a little picture of both our family, and you could be praying for us. We're coming up on the 5th anniversary of my wife's passing, October 28th next week. And so 5 years since my wife passed. And I can say for me that the church, this tiny little church in Fort Worth, Texas, has helped me put my heart back together. And so we're trying to inspire you. We're trying to help you understand, how will people come into your church, a place of belonging to Jesus, belonging to each other. We're made to be more. We're made to be a masterpiece. How can we help people put their hearts back together? And I believe this is such an important moment for us. I'm so grateful to be here to help you amplify the message of Jesus in your life and in your neighborhoods and in your households. And I'm just praying for you that you would make much of Jesus in the days to come. Thank you so much.